It's really nice to see so many of you here this afternoon for a talk which is going to be very interesting and enlightening on the impact and early history of the National Library of Wales. And I'm delighted to present our speaker this afternoon, Calista Williams, who is one of the PhD students based in the National Library. We have 4 PhD students based here, working with different higher education institutions on a range of topics, but all of them have both an interest in the collections of the National Library of Wales and also a digital humanities interest in approaches to their research. Calista is part of the Open University. Her other supervisors are based in the Open University in Milton Keynes. And I've been supervising her since she started here on issues related to the digital humanities and digital collections aspects of her talk. So her talk today is about half an hour long, and then she's kindly agreed to take some questions afterwards. So I'll hand over to Calista. Thank you.
Thanks, Lorna. Croeso, welcome, and thank you all for coming today. I would like to thank the National Library, and in particular Anne Hagrid-Lewis, for organising this event. When I was planning this talk on evaluating the impact of the National Library of Wales, 1909 to 1916, I began to think about when my interest was first sparked by this topic, and thought that this would be a good place to start today. My interest in the history of the National Library of Wales began with this man in the centre of the photograph. John Ballinger, who was the first librarian of the National Library. He was head librarian from when the library first opened in 1909 until his retirement in 1930. Previously, Ballinger had been the head librarian at Cardiff Library, therefore heading 2 of Wales's most significant public libraries over a time span of some 45 years. I became aware of Ballinger whilst working as a National Library volunteer on a project called Corporate Records. This work involved sorting through various documents relating to the library's history and summarising their contents. The material was very diverse, from letters concerning staff recruitment to significant book purchases and donations. One of my favourite letters from this collection was sent to the library in 1913 by a wine merchant named Mr. Cully from Cardiff. Mr. Cully requests a reference from John Ballinger for a Mr. A. Ward of Aberdyfi, who, when ordering some wine from Cully, had said he was associated with Aberystwyth University. Mr. Cully, the wine merchant, seems more than a little concerned about Mr. Ward's credentials and has held off sending the wine until receiving the OK from Ballinger. Although a document like this contains only a minor incident, it reviews the influence someone like John Ballinger had within the wider community, and how quickly the National Library had become a respected institution. It was the correspondence of John Ballinger that really drew my attention, and after working for several months on this project, I began to piece together how this institution had developed, pinpoint some of the influential people involved, and see the potential for an exciting PhD proposal. So here I am, 1 year into that project, I think even more enthralled by the library's genesis and subsequent development as a Welsh cultural institution. The aim of today's presentation is to outline briefly the purpose of my research project, and then focus on 3 collections of documents which shed some light on the library's impact. The primary aim of my research is to explore the connection between the National Library of Wales and Welsh national identity during the period 1870 to 1916. My thesis will evaluate the National Library of Wales within the context of other national libraries active during this time, investigate the campaign for a national library which started at the Mold Eisteddfod of 1873, analyse the early workings of the library, including the contributions made to the Building Fund and the relationship between Ballinger and Sir John Williams, and the final section of the thesis explores the impact of the National Library on Wales and beyond. And the overall project will address the following research questions. To what extent is the library an indicator of a shift in popular perceptions of national identity during this time period? To what extent did the National Library of Wales have an impact on the people of Wales? Was it an institution that catered for a large proportion of the population, or was it accessed only by an elite few? Is there evidence to suggest that it was manipulated by political and cultural elites seeking to build national identities? To what extent did those involved in establishing and managing the library seek to instill a particular version of Welsh national identity, consciously or not? And finally, is there evidence to suggest that the library's decision-making processes were actually shaped by its users? These are challenging questions, and after only a year of research, cannot yet be answered. However, understanding how users interacted with the library and what possible impact it had on the people of Wales and beyond is a useful starting point. My talk today will look at three aspects of my research, which I'm in the process of analysing. The first is the library's Reader's Register, kept between the years 1909 and 1912. The second is the Workers' Educational Association book box scheme, set up by the National Library. And the third is a collection of books sent to the Welsh internees held at the Ruhleben camp in Berlin during World War I. Before discussing the Reader's Register, it is worth noting that it was not until 1916 that the library building we're in today was opened. Until then, the library was temporarily housed in the assembly rooms behind the Old College. This photo shows the new bookshelves being erected here before the arrival of John Williams's substantial donations of books and manuscripts. I mention this because I want to set the scene, so when I talk about the readers in the reading room, you can imagine them at the assembly rooms and not in the reading rooms that we know today. I discovered the National Library's Reader's Register in the archive during the first couple of months of starting my PhD, and saw immediately its potential to shed light on how the library was used once it was opened. The register is available from April 1909 to September 1912 and is divided up into printed books and manuscripts, because at this time these departments were separate. The register looks like this and is divided into 4 columns, displaying the date in the first column, the title of the item requested in the second, sometimes the author or the date of publication is included. In the third, the name of the reader, again, if we're lucky, the full name, but sometimes just initials and surname. And in the last column, some information on their location. This can be a full address, a town or an institution, for example, University College Wales or Theological College. I realised that by collating this data, I'd be able to map the location of the readers, discover if there were popular titles, authors or topics, determine the gender mix of the readers, establish on average how many people were using the reading room on a given day, monitor attendance, whether attendance increased over time, etc. I began to research the readers whose full name and address were included and found their forms from the 1911 census. I decided that in order to get a more detailed and nuanced picture of the users of the National Library, I would need to augment the raw data from the register with the personal information from the census. So I went from having a name and location to knowing a reader's age, their position in the household, their profession, where they were born, and whether they spoke Welsh, English, or both languages. I'll show you a couple of examples of how this works, starting with the Reader's Register. So for example, here we have A. Bassett Jones from Aberystwyth, and then if we look for him on the 1911 census, there he is, Arthur Bassett Jones, head of his household, 42. And then we can start to build a more detailed profile of that reader. So Arthur Bassett Jones lived in Aberystwyth. He was born in 1869, single, living with his sister and brother, working as a physician and surgeon. And between the 6th of August 1909 and the 18th of September, he visits the library 4 times. He also speaks Welsh and English. And then we can go that step further and start to look at the books that he was looking at. An analysis of the medicinal waters of Llandrydrod, the spas of Wales, 2 travel books, one on Bwth Wells and one on Llandrydrod Wells, and a book about the physicians of the Midfai. Again, another example, if we look at E.J. Lloyd at the top there from Llanilla, and we find her, which is exciting, on the census, and she was actually the first woman to visit the reading rooms. And we start to build a profile of Elizabeth. 19th of August 1909. I do a kind of silent cheer in the reading room when I found the first woman to visit the library. Born in 1889, a student living with her mother in Llanilla, born in Llynna and speaks Welsh and English. I've also been using Welsh biography online, available via the National Library's website, to find out even more information about particular readers. Elizabeth Lloyd, for example, I discovered studied Welsh at Aberystwyth and then wrote her MA thesis on the history of the Eisteddfod. There is a potential to link the books readers used to what they later go on to write, and then consider the impact of those texts in terms of readership numbers. But this more detailed approach will happen later in the project. So we have all these wonderful individual stories which are fascinating in and of themselves, and I think bring the early days of the library to life. But I realised that in terms of producing data for my thesis, I needed to transcribe, research and analyse a sizable chunk of data. So I decided to work out how many transactions there were between 1909 and 1912, a transaction being every time a reader requested a book. So across printed books and manuscripts, this came to 7,200. I worked out this would take me about the length of my PhD to transcribe if I didn't do anything else at all. But I really wanted to use all of this data because, unlike public library records, where we can tell what books people took home with them, it is very hard to pinpoint whether they actually read them or not. However, the National Library model is different because the reader is sat down in the reading room with the requested titles in front of them. I'm not saying that they definitely read these books, but I think the chances are increased. So I explained my dilemma to Lorna, and she suggested setting this up as a volunteer project, like the corporate records project I had been part of that I mentioned earlier. The library agreed, and since I've recruited a group of volunteers who are helping me enter the information, which will drastically reduce the amount of time it will take to transcribe the whole reader's register. So far, we've entered into the database approximately 200 readers and 250 books. I'm now going to present a summary of the data entered so far, but I want to emphasise that this is early on in the project and that these findings are still very much a work in progress. So let's start by looking at gender distribution. The green segment represents the 15% of the 200 readers who are yet to be identified. This is because the reader or librarian has only written down an initial and surname. And if this is a name like T. Jones with no added location details attached, it becomes pretty hard to identify them. This problem can only be remedied if they visit the library again and more information is recorded the next time, which has happened in some cases. The 200 readers we have transcribed account for almost 2 years' worth of visits. This means that so far 70% of the readers have been male and 10% female. Out of the 20 identified women who visited the reading room, 11 were students at the university in Aberystwyth, 3 were teachers, 1 was an author, and 2 whose professions are still unknown. The number of female students may be in part a result of Aberystwyth University being one of the first universities to admit women, coupled with their decision to build Alexandra Hall in 1896, which is an all-female hall, which is now mixed, situated at the end of the promenade. One of the main reasons for developing the database was so I could try to gauge the effect of building the library in Aberystwyth rather than Cardiff. Out of the 200 readers, I've been able to map the location of 163, and these are the results. Obviously, you can see straight away that Ceredigion, or Cardiganshire, as it was then, is a particular hotspot. The readers who travelled the furthest came from the cities of Manchester, Liverpool, London, and Exeter. And we also have one reader from Guernsey. You can see clearly the effect of having a regular train service that connected Aberystwyth to Carmarthen and Swansea, which in a way makes Aberystwyth more remote today in terms of public transport than in 1910. There is a smattering of readers from Glamorganshire, but only 2 from Cardiff. Cardiff and Aberystwyth had been keen to host the National Library of Wales, and both mounted large campaigns to secure it. Aberystwyth triumphed, which can be attributed to several key factors. The promise of John Williams' substantial collection if the library was built in Aberystwyth, the purchasing of the land in Aberystwyth by Lord Rendell, the housing of the acting National Library of Wales by the University College, and the location of Aberystwyth, situated in the centre of Wales, so that neither north or south would be cut off. I will be analysing both campaigns in detail over the coming months, as this area is especially relevant to the current work, because it highlights many of the issues surrounding the perception of a true Welsh national identity, especially in relation to location, as the flourishing industrial Anglicised south was pitted against the declining agrarian Welsh-speaking west. The heat map is the most startling, as it reveals just how many of the National Library's visitors were actually living in close proximity to the building itself. Actually, 46% of the first sample of readers we have taken were from Aberystwyth. Let us turn now to the readers' professions. Out of the first 200 readers, we've been able to identify 113 of their professions, and here is a breakdown of this information as a bar chart. As you can see so far, clergymen and students have been the most frequent visitors, followed by school teachers and university lecturers. The number of students using the library was not a surprise because at this time the library was situated just behind the old college in Laura Place and was still regarded by some as an offshoot of the university's library services. The majority of the lecturers who visited were actually working at the university and lived in Aberystwyth. I've not yet analysed what texts the school teachers were using when they came to the library, but it's clear that some travelled quite far to use it, as 2/3 of the teachers came from outside of Ceredigion, including the towns of Liverpool and Stockport. The amount of clergymen listed in the Reader's Register surprised me, and is certainly an area I will be researching further. It may be connected to the opening of a theological college on the seafront in 1906, which relocated teachers and students from Tafeka Religious College in the Brecon Beacons. It may also be connected to the religious revival in Wales from 1904 to 5, and also the availability at the library of the historical religious texts, hitherto inaccessible to the public. I will now talk briefly about the books that were requested. I have not analysed the book selection as closely as the reader's data, as this work is planned for the coming year. However, I can reveal which subjects have been the most popular so far. An analysis of this data has shown that history was the most popular subject by quite a long way, and this is followed by reference, then religion, and then poetry, fiction being the least read of all the subjects. Further analysis of this data will shed further light on how readers were using the library and whether the selected reading material may indicate a shift in popular perceptions of national identity in Wales. Already in the first data sample, there have been several books that have been requested multiple times by different readers. These include the annual publication of the Cambrian Archaeological Association, first published in 1846, and a history of all the writers and bishops who were educated at Oxford, published in 1691, and the Description of Pembrokeshire by George Owen, which was published in 1603. They're the kind of three top titles. As you can see from these preliminary findings, we can already begin to see patterns in usage, be able to identify key user groups and pinpoint geographical reader hotspots. There is much work to be done, but I'm confident it will yield revealing and valuable results. Once open to the public, the library was keen to avoid accusations of elitism, but also had a genuine desire to bring education and Welsh culture to the working people of Wales. The library's building fund had received contributions from various sections of Welsh society, including working men, who had been encouraged to donate a percentage of their wage to the cause. Therefore, in May 1912, the Court of Governors passed the following resolution, that the court requests the council to consider and report upon the manner in which the resources of the library could be made available for the assistance of tutorial classes, mainly for working men in Wales. The majority of these tutorial classes were run by the Workers' Educational Association, or WEA, founded in 1903, which has set up a branch of their organisation in Wales in 1907. In the autumn of 1912, John Ballinger and John Thomas, who was the organising secretary of the WEA in Wales, began to correspond on the logistics of coordinating a book box scheme for these various tutorial classes. Their correspondence on the matter continued for the next year, culminating in a report written by Ballinger in November 1913, which he presented to the President and Court of Governors. Ballinger lists all the classes that are active in Wales, which numbered 18, but highlighted 7, which are asterisks here, which were most in need of a supply of books. It is clear from the correspondence that these classes were prioritised because of the lack of public library services in these areas. Although the governors wanted to make resources available, one of the potential drawbacks of participating in this scheme was the possibility of losing library stock, and I get the sense from Ballinger's report that he fears the Court of Governors may not be keen to take this risk. Ballinger, having already foreseen this potential stumbling block, ends his report by quoting from the library's charter. The Charter of the National Library provides for, quote, the creation and maintenance of duplicate and multiplicate specimens and collections to be lent and used from time to time for the purpose of exhibition and instruction. By referencing this clause, he legitimises the proposed scheme by highlighting the library's commitment to community outreach. This clause also suggests that before a book was sent out, at least 2 copies had to be available, so one could remain in the library. From the research I have conducted so far, matching books required by classes with books purchased by the library, this procedure is borne out, revealing that these books were not just available to the tutorial class participants, but also to the library user via the public catalogue. A number of texts were not stocked by the library until the classes began. Therefore, the remote library users were helping to shape the library collection. It indicates that the development of the library's collections were not just initiated from the top down by those running the library, but that they were also shaped from the bottom up by the library's users in attendance and remotely. The first book boxes were sent out in January 1914, and then another batch was sent out 6 months later. By the end of 1916, approximately 30 groups were receiving a book box, and this map reveals which areas of Wales benefited the most. South Wales was sent the most book boxes. This is due to the South being heavily populated by workers at this time, so more WEA classes were started and maintained. Also, as the scheme developed during 1914, classes would teach the same subject, so book boxes could be swapped with other groups, rather than returning them to the library. This element of the scheme may have led to new groups starting up within a reasonable distance of another class to benefit from this lending scheme. The first classes to receive a book box were studying economics, and the requested titles were sent to the library by the class tutors. Again, more research needs to be conducted into the significance of these book choices, but even from a first glance, it is evident they studied an eclectic mix of literature, covering socialist, Marxist, and capitalist theory. The selection also suggests a challenging programme of study, which would have involved a substantial amount of in-depth reading. In the majority of cases, this would have to have been fitted around long and tiring days at work. It is evident from the correspondence between the library and the various class tutors that without this book box scheme, it would have been extremely difficult to source these texts, as it was beyond most of the men's budgets to purchase large amounts of books, and according to the Adams report of 1915, 54% of Wales's population lived in an area that did not provide library facilities. The scheme continued in limited capacity throughout World War I, and then from 1918 went from strength to strength, continuing at least into the late 1930s. Of course, there were problems with lost books, as tutors tried to keep a track of who had what, and quite a large proportion of the correspondence concerns those lost items. Despite these issues, it is clear that the scheme benefited a large amount of people, and later it may be possible to calculate this amount using the WEA archive records. It was not only men who benefited from the scheme, because in June 1914, the library sent a book box containing feminist texts to the Cardiff and District Women's Suffrage Society. Because of the necessary duplicate copies, the amount of feminist literature available via the public catalogue at the library increased. The historian Chris Baggs, writing in the 1990s about the scheme, emphasises, quote, how important the service was to the National Library in defining its role in Welsh cultural life. The National Library kept faith with those who had provided their pennies and undoubtedly contributed greatly to providing miners with the best literature. In early 1915, the library was involved in a national scheme called Books for Troops, which made reading material available to soldiers. Requests appeared in newspapers asking citizens to donate books and magazines, which would then be distributed accordingly. Reading material was sent to troops fighting on the front line and to training camps around the UK, where reading rooms were set up for recruits to use for recreation. John Ballinger was involved in setting up a Books for Troops subcommittee for Wales and coordinated the distribution of thousands of books to camps in Aberystwyth, as well as in places like Angle in Pembrokeshire and Rhyl in Denbighshire. These libraries were often manned by volunteers from the regiment to make sure that books were returned. In fact, 2 of the librarians from the National Library who had signed up put their skills to good use and ran a small lending library where they were stationed. Books for Troops is striking because of the sheer volume of books it managed to distribute, but it was a blanket approach and relied on the public to donate interesting, desirable material. In contrast, troops stationed at training camps in Wales were encouraged to send in their book requests to the National Library on specially designed postcards. They were able to borrow a particular book for home reading, which would be sent to them, and then they would be expected to return it to the library within 14 days. There are approximately 135 of these postcards still in the library archive, on which are written the soldier's name, location, regiment number, and details of the book they wish to borrow. This must have been a logistical nightmare for the library, with books sent out to various training camps where men were living in temporary accommodation in the hope that the book would be returned within 14 days. It must have been quite time-consuming, collecting, sending, and checking in books, as well as monitoring the ones that were late. The fact that the library persevered with this scheme, despite its difficulties, suggests that they deemed it worthwhile, providing a personal service tailored to the reader's requirements. Men would have been able to request books that they actually wanted to read, rather than having to rely on the lottery of the book box. This service mimicked that offered by the public library and would have been a reminder of what life had been like before they had signed up. The library provided a variety of books, including a collection of Tennyson's poems, a copy of Bram Stoker's Dracula's Guest, and a book on Edward VII. On one postcard in the space provided to write the name of the book required is just written the word romance. I can't work out if this is a book request or not. Importantly, it was a service that treated the men as individuals in a time when their own identities were being eroded as they were increasingly defined by their participation in the war. In September 1915, Principal Roberts at the University in Aberystwyth received a letter from a former student, Tom Williams, who was being held at the Ruhleben internment camp in Berlin. Williams explained that a Celtic society had been formed at the camp in the February of that year, but little had been done since. So Williams, along with 4 other University College Wales graduates, who were also in the camp, which I think is kind of amazing, had decided to start a movement which would cater for the 70 Welshmen who were being held there. The Ruhleben camp was a racecourse which had been converted into an internment camp in the October and November of 1914 to house approximately 5,000 British men. These prisoners had either been resident in Germany, visiting, or working at sea in territorial waters at the outbreak of the war. In fact, Tom Williams, in his letter to Principal Roberts, declared that 2/3 of the 70 Welshmen at the camp were seafaring men. These men had been captured following the breakdown of negotiations over the return of German civilians held in Britain. This internment was a reactionary and retaliatory act and was presumed at the time to only be a temporary measure. However, the majority of these citizens remained at the camp until armistice in November 1918. It's important to emphasise that Ruhleben was the only civilian detention site in Germany and did not contain POWs. Therefore, even though there were some new arrivals over the 4 years, the members of the camp remained pretty constant. Here is a drawing of one of the camp rooms sketched by one of the internees. The many books on the shelf suggest they were treated as permanent living spaces. This consistency led to the development of long-term activities at the camp, such as the Camp magazine, now incidentally available to peruse on the Cymru 1914 website, theatre productions, a postal service, and a school. After reading the prospectus of work for September 1916, possibly school doesn't do it justice. Their activities resemble a micro-university, with a general and subcommittee, term dates, membership cards, public examinations which are endorsed by academic institutions back in Britain, and a huge variety of subjects available to study, including languages, science, arts, and handicrafts. Tom Williams stated in his letter that, I'll quote from that, I have already approached the authorities of the camp school, and a Celtic section has been formed to include at our suggestion classes on elementary and advanced Welsh, Cymric, and Irish literature. I've also been round various barracks and found that the lessons now given can only be supplemented by a small number of part-song pamphlets containing Welsh texts. a few Welsh grammars, a dictionary, and a Welsh Bible or two. All the men are keen, and I am sure that with a little help from the people at home, we can give many hero a good serviceable knowledge of our language and our various institutions. It is probable that the soldiers requested material relating to Wales and the Welsh language because they wanted to connect with a sense of their collective national identity in what were extremely isolating circumstances. But they also took this opportunity to disseminate information about their homeland and their language. It is also interesting that Williams mentions our various institutions, and I assume that he had the university and probably the National Library in mind. William concludes by asking, "Could you, sir, approach the Celtic Society at the college, or else any wealthy Welshman would be prepared to send us a selection of books? Perhaps the students have some books which they no longer require. All that is necessary is that they should be Welsh books, dealing with the language, literature, eminent Welshmen, Welsh histories, these of course may be in English, poems, histories of the university and the Eisteddfod." So the Ruhleben letter is dated the 22nd of September, and by the 8th of October, Principal Roberts is corresponding with Ballinger, who else, on the matter. He encloses a list of people he has asked to make either a financial contribution or a donation of relevant books. In addition, the letter is printed in the Cambrian News with the note that Ballinger at the National Library of Wales has kindly promised to dispatch the books obtained in response to the appeal. The books were certainly dispatched to Ruhleben by mid-October 1915, because on the 15th, Principal Roberts wrote to Ballinger again to say that he has received the final list of books and declares that there is nothing more to be done at this time. The final list reveals that 260 different titles were sent. So including multiple copies, this equates to 1,460 books. As well as collecting and dispatching the books to the camp, the library also chose and purchased some books to be included. Luckily included with the final book list is a breakdown of which books were donated and by who, so it is clear which books were purchased by the library. In total, the library contributed 37 items, of which 22 are unique titles. 3 of the titles were sent in multiples of 6. The Scholar's Welsh Dictionary, published in 1900, Folk Songs No. 1 and Folk Songs No. 2. In fact, almost 65% of the items sent are music related. If we refer back to the original letter, there are no requests for music to be sent. Williams points out that the lessons now given can only be supplemented by a small number of part song pamphlets containing Welsh text, but does not request any more, and specifically asks for Welsh books dealing with the language, literature, eminent Welshmen, etc. Therefore, it is the library who decides to send a substantial amount of Welsh songs, possibly providing us with an insight into the library's perception of Welshness and national identity during this period. Unfortunately, at present, I am not a Welsh speaker, so Andrew Cusworth, who is also a PhD student here at the library, has very kindly provided me with information on the music that was sent. Andrew is exploring the potential new directions offered by digital humanities methods in the fields of music and musicology, and his research focuses on Welsh traditional music. The material sent to Ruhleben is a mixture of Welsh folk song and national song. Individual sheet music was sent, as well as collected volumes. Andrew has very kindly recorded extracts from 2 of the songs sent to the camp for us to hear today. The folk song Diawe Dawin, I hope I've made some attempt to say that right, taken from a version from a pre-war issue of the Welsh Folk Song Society Journal. And the second is the national song St David's Day, from Brynley Richards' The Songs of Wales, which is one of the collections sent by the library to the camp. The song recounts the story of how Wales adopted the leek as its emblem, and one of the verses is as follows. The Saxons in their will distress, of this their hour of need, disguise themselves in the British dress, the hero to mislead. But soon the Welshman's eager ken perceived the craven play, and gave a leek to all his men upon St David's Day. So we'll just listen to the songs.
Wrth fi'n defod deu dywyn, la 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 la. Troed a chi'n miawn yn chlinyn, la 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 la. Ac wrth bas Johannes Maengwyn, la 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 la. Dwedodd deu o dac o dawyn, la 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 la.
So I'm aware that this talk has probably generated more questions than it has provided answers, but the research that I plan to conduct over the coming 2 years will hopefully go some way to filling these gaps. To finish, I'll return to Ballinger, who, whilst giving a lecture in 1902 in Aberdeen on the future of public libraries, proclaimed that, quote, "The greatest citizen should not be above the library, and the library should not be above the meanest citizen." An abiding principle I think he adhered to for the rest of his career, and probably affected how the National Library interacted with its users. I hope today's talk has given you an insight into who actually used the National Library's facilities between 1909 and 1916, and made you aware that the library did not just provide services to the people using the reading room in Aberystwyth, but also made books available to working men in the labour clubs of the Ronda, soldiers in training camps in Pembrokeshire, and internees held in Berlin. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Calista. It's fascinating. I have time for a few questions. Questions? I wanted to ask about the archive records of the Workers' Education Association. You mentioned that you were going to try and track down some of those as part of your research.
Some are in, I think, the Miners' Library in Swansea. There's a few bits and pieces in the archive here, but I think it definitely will be a case of patching things together. There may possibly be some at Cardiff Public Library as well. I've only recently discovered their quite big archive. So yeah, it'll be a bit of a search around South Wales.
And they'll be complementary to the data that we have.
Yes, yeah. At the library here, there's a lot of correspondence that have kind of ended up staying just because they were corresponding with Ballinger. But yeah. Yes.
How will you go about understanding what's meant by national identity? How would you find a working definition of that? Because it seems like a pretty fluffy...
Yeah, I think it still is to a certain extent. Yeah, I think it's... I don't really want to kind of nail my colours to the most quite yet. I think it will definitely kind of come out of the research. It's going to be, I think, kind of the next place where I'm going to go, which is going to be looking at the books in detail, what was being read in the reading room, and start to think about, it's interesting already that history was such a dominant category, and whether that's actually Welsh history, and whether that's Welsh history written in Welsh or written in English. So I think that will be a place to start, but yeah, it's still work in progress.
I was just curious, do we know anything about the reader from Guernsey and what he or she might have been reading? Yes.
I don't know about what he was reading, but his last name was Fleur, and he was a student first of all at Aberystwyth University, and then he taught here until I think 1908. That's as far as I've got, but I'll be able to let you know what his selection of books are soon.
I was wondering, Calista, if there was any evidence that the men who had been interned in Germany or had been sent books in boxes to other parts of the country had used the library after they came back?
Oh, I don't know. Mainly because my project at the moment is only going up to 1916, so I haven't really... In fact, so the Reader's Register exists at the moment between 1909 and 1912, and then there's a gap between 1912 and 1918, but maybe later on, possibly after the PhD, because I think I will expand the database and maybe move on to that next selection that, yeah, they may turn up. And they may have also been using the library before they went. So, because at the moment I've still got quite a large percentage of the Reader's Register to enter, they may turn up. So, yeah, it's possible.
Yeah, does any of the correspondence indicate how many of the books were returned for these projects around the country?
Yeah, certainly with the Workers' Education Association, as I mentioned, a huge amount of the correspondence is angry librarians sending letters, and they get kind of less and less polite about, where are our books? Because the classes are only really meant to hang on to the books for about 6 months, and then either pass them on to another class or send them back to the library. But the workers would, which was what was meant to happen, was to borrow the books and take them home. So often there would be like a separate box would be sent with like a couple of books that had only just come in. But yeah, I'm sure that they did lose titles. But maybe they had a kind of idea of what they were that they thought they might lose. Budgeted for that.
Do you have questions?
Yes, well, partly I was just delighted to see how significant poetry was on the list.
Oh, yes.
And I was thinking in the context of what people were reading in war situations, and Paul Fussell's very famous book, Great War and Modern Memory, I think, where he talks about poetry being actually a very standard thing to read for soldiers. And I was thinking about songs and sending the songs instead of kind of more conventional historical books, and wondering whether they were serving that kind of purpose, as a kind of a comfort, a reassurance, as opposed to having an explicitly nationalist agenda.
Yeah, and it may be the case that the library kind of decided that themselves, that they didn't just want to send the educational text, because maybe they thought that. And I think as well that song was something that people could do together. And maybe the library was thinking of that more than the group.
It's kind of lovely that the library was saying, hey, we're going to send things that are actually going to help you out, make you feel better.
Yeah, and I think hearing the songs as well, we can't definitely say, unless maybe there'll be diary material, but that they did sing those songs in Ruhleben. But there is a kind of nice idea to imagine that at this, race course, all surrounded by barbed wire, that you'd be able to hear these lovely Welsh songs. And actually, when the soldiers are requesting books when they're at the training camp, there is quite a lot of poetry and fiction. When you think of the kind of balance between there's not that much fiction being requested in the reading room, actually when the soldiers come to borrow books on their postcards that they send, there's a lot of fiction.
Very interesting.
Any other questions? I feel sure we're going to have an update.
When I filled in all those gaps, I imagine.
Fascinating stuff. So thank you again for coming, and thanks very much, Calista.